everyone. This is Steve Kemp with the People Not Titles podcast, and I am just pleased to have my good friend and colleague, Felix Gonzalez. Felix is a real estate attorney and just an active member in his community. He's a passionate guy, and I'm excited about hearing Felix's kind of career journey and talking about what's important to you, Felix. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks. So Felix, let's talk. You weren't born an attorney, but you are one now. And let's talk a little bit about that journey. You're going into school. At what age did you think to yourself, okay, I'm going to get my law degree. I want to be an attorney?
Well, I probably was a rambunctious kid, just like a lot of other people. One of the lawyer jokes that's always out there is that I argued a lot, and so therefore I should have gone to law school. That's kind of a common trope amongst lawyers. But
did you argue a lot as a kid, by the way?
Well, not in my household. My dad was very strict, and he was a disciplinarian for sure, so there was not a lot of argumentation. But there was a lot of understanding that there's two sides to every story.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of that as I was growing up. And as I went to, undergraduate, I was at U of I for undergrad. I actually went in as a College of Business major. But about halfway through, I decided that perhaps I wanted to get a little bit more of what I would have viewed as a traditional liberal arts education, and I actually became a philosophy major. And so philosophy then, as I sat around the kitchen table at the house and I had a conversation with my dad, and I told him, I said, well, Dad, I think I'm going to change majors. I'm going to move from business. I'm going to move into philosophy. And he looked at me and goes, well, what the heck are you going to do with that? Mm-hmm. And at that point, that's when I really decided that I wanted to continue my education and go to law school.
So what had you, did you toggle to philosophy?
I sure did, yeah. That's where I got my BA.
What was it? Was there anything that you identified, like this isn't my path, this is? What was that what light bulb went on?
So in high school, I had a teacher that was a PhD, and he had a PhD in philosophy, and he was really an instrumental role. I still talk to him to this day, and we interact, and he's a wonderful man. And he and I had talked, and I always appreciated that he seemed to know a lot about a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. He was very well versed in art and history and culture and all of these other things. I think what we would still call worldly, had a worldly education. Mm-hmm. And, looking down at books and figures and numbers in business school, it was boring for me, and so I decided I wanted to be educated if I was going to spend all of this money going to college. And I've always been a thinker, I suppose. Philosopher, the word really means lover of wisdom. So I felt that if I educated myself in the thoughts of a bunch of old dead guys, that I might myself grow in my own education.
Yeah, and it seems like, you're not going to study business, you're going to study philosophy. What are you going to do with it? It's like, well, we're all people, and the more you study people and wisdom that has helped people in the ages be successful and live fruitful lives, the more productive you can be in any field, right? I mean, that's
absolutely, yeah. And one of the keys in philosophy. So you start off, of course, with the ancient Greeks. Their study of culture in terms of like how the polis worked and how democracy, and then you're talking about Hume and Locke and individual rights and all of these things. They're literally a direct feed into the entire study of law.
Yes. And so then when did that click on and say, okay, I'm going to go now into law? Was it when you moved to philosophy?
Right.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. It was essentially a simultaneous decision. I said, if I'm going to be here for another 2 years, I want to enjoy what I'm studying.
Yep.
And then knowing that baristas don't make the kind of money that my ambitions had decided to undertake, I said I'll make a simultaneous decision to end up going to law school. And I ended up going to U of I College of Law as well as U of I for my undergrad.
Wow, that's awesome. And so you graduated, you're out of law school now. It's a funny thing, Felix, that most people would look at a person like you, been a lawyer for how many years now?
23, coming on 24.
24 years, and go, man, you were either born a lawyer or you were so clear in your career path, or there was just, I wish I had that clarity. And then as you unpack people's journeys, you realize they really weren't so clear. There were these moments where they were like, gosh, I'm taking a risk and I got to go tell my dad and I got to make these decisions and now I got to make something out of it. All these kind of crossroads that you hit.
Well, even within the practice of law, I would say that I've had several career changes.
Absolutely.
So when I first graduated, I went and I did what they call insurance defense work. So I worked for insurance carriers who had insureds who had been sued as a result of accidents. So some were trucking companies. CHA was one of our clients. Some of the foster care agencies throughout the state were. We had accidents that dealt with, people getting crushed in elevators to car accidents, pretty much anything all over the map.
And you're defending these companies that are being sued.
So the insureds,
Yes.
which had insurance policies,
Yep.
right? So they would be companies, or sometimes they would be individuals.
I
as
see.
well. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I did that. I had worked at State Farm in an internship, 1 year prior to going to law school, and I thought that that was going to be where I was at, just a, corporate, defense insurance lawyer. And I did that for a few years at my first shop coming out of law school. Really enjoyed it. Got a wonderful experience.
So you're arguing in courtrooms.
I probably within about 3 or 4 weeks after getting sworn in, I'm already in court handling motions. Most of it was already prepared by other lawyers in
Sure.
the firm, but getting that opportunity to cut my teeth, to get in there, to get into the mix, to get into knowing the Chicago legal community of plaintiffs' attorneys and the judges and everything else.
Okay, and what were your big takeaway from that period of time? Like, what skill do you still have that you learned right there, in action?
So I had a good mentor at the firm, and his name is Jim Bartlett. And Jim really had a good way of relating to people. So he was not an argumentative attorney. He was the sort of attorney who essentially let me know that, hey, you're going to see these other attorneys down the road. You're going to see these other judges down the road. Set your reputation now that you're a young lawyer of being honest and truthful. And more importantly, don't be outrageous as you're trying to negotiate cases.
Grandstanding.
No grandstanding. Be reasonable up front, because it always comes to fruition in the back. And, ironically, years after I had even left that firm, lawyers that I worked with while I was there would remember, I remember we had that case, and I know you're a straight shooter. And ultimately, I think in your legal career especially, when you have a good reputation, that tends to follow you.
Mm-hmm. And you aren't a pushover. Right.
Yeah. Not at
so
all.
so you fought for your client, but at the same time, there's a way to do it respectfully and to
Right.
win the day, as opposed to, everyone loses and I win.
You make it about the facts. You don't make it about the personalities, and that's really what it came down to.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, so what happened from there? Then you made a transition.
So, if anybody knows anything about some of the insurance defense firms, there's a lot of hours and there's not a lot of love. So I got recruited to actually practice down the road from our studio location here today, and I practiced in Oak Brook, and I switched to the dark side. I started doing plaintiff's work.
Okay.
So I did that for about 4.5 years, right over here by the Oak Brook Mall. I worked for a sole practitioner, and even took all of that experience that I'd gotten in the year and a half that I worked at the first firm, and was able to translate that into developing a portfolio of business for myself, representing clients doing the same type of work. The first couple of months, judges were like, well, wait a minute, how come you're on the plaintiff side? And I said, well, Judge, I've changed firms. And they're like, oh, okay, switch teams, huh? And so that was actually kind of funny for a little while.
And what you realize then probably is that there is two sides to every story.
Absolutely.
Right? And now I need to argue this side. And so you're on the other side of the table, and now you have empathy and understanding of these people that are the defense folks.
Right. And then sometimes when I would go up against attorneys that we used to share co-defendants, now they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that same spirit of cooperation, but representation was always there, and I found that actually benefited my clients. We did very well those years that I was in plaintiff's work.
Excellent. Okay, so so you got both sides of that on the insurance work. Then what?
Well, so I did that, and then the market was changing. So this was probably the early 2000s, and I'm also bilingual. I speak Spanish, and the first time that a real estate file came through my office, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I've never done it. So in those days, you went to the library. You went to the law library downtown, and there's resources like the ICL to walk you through how you do a real estate closings, things that you should know. and I spent a few days up there just going through the book and making my notes. And then I started taking on real estate clients, and being one of the few bilingual attorneys here in DuPage, I started to go to closings and tried to do a good job, and agents started just handing me their cards, and soon they were handing me their files.
And this was while you were still working in doing insurance work?
Well, I had left the insurance
Okay.
work. I was doing the plaintiff's work,
Yep.
and then I started getting the transactional real estate
Okay.
work. And then the real estate work actually ended up taking up about 50% of my practice within about an 18-month period of time. So that's how I started growing my book using those services.
Okay. And then at what point did you go off on your own?
So I was with that practitioner for about 4.5 years, and then a colleague of mine that I'd known for a number of years had a corporate firm downtown, and he asked me to join him, and I ended up working with him at a firm for 2 years. I was a named partner there as well. And then he made some career changes because he actually went to go work for the daily administration. And he did that for a period of time. And as he went off to the daily administration, I decided to start up my own shop. And I did that in the southwest side of Chicago, where I was living at the time. And we named it the Archer Law Group because I'm on Archer Avenue.
And when was that?
Well, that was about 18 years ago now, Steve.
Okay.
That was about 18 years ago now.
Yeah, and what I think what a real estate agent who is considering an attorney should know is that you're an entrepreneur. You know what I mean? That
Absolutely.
you do know what it's like to open up the door and to walk in and go, I got to make something happen today.
Turn on the lights, pay the bills, make the calls, send
Yeah,
the emails, all
yeah.
of the work, yeah.
And was that a gulp for you at that time, or did you kind of just go into it like, oh well, whatever, you don't even know what what you're getting into, or was that like a big decision for you? Am I going to join another firm, or am I going to go start my own business? Was that a passion, or was that kind of like, oh, I guess I got to do it this way?
Well, I think that it was a fortuity of circumstance. I had a group of friends who actually had a real estate office, and they had a number of agents, and they were in a growth phase for their business. And I was invited to come in and essentially rent a spot. And so I figured that
Is this pre-Big Short?
This was pre the Big Short.
Okay.
This is like 2004-ish.
Yep.
And so, I mean, deals coming in left and right, keeping very busy. I mean, at one point I had 2 other attorneys, almost 3, and basically 2.5 working with me. I had 2 or 3 secretaries. And then, of course, the market made its flip, as it frequently does, maybe even now. But, starting up your own office is really almost as complicated as trying to name your own child.
Yep.
You realize, hey, I have to create a name, I have to create a brand. What do I want this to look like? What do I want the customer service experience to look like? And you have to visualize all of that and put it into plan.
And all the while, I have to generate business.
And in the meantime, you're still grinding and still
Yeah.
representing the clients and getting up early. And I was married at the time, and raising the kids and doing all of that other fun stuff as well. So just continuing to grow it all.
So when the time came, Felix, for the market to turn at that time, were you ready for it? Did you see it? Were you surprised? I know that no one. I don't know that anyone thought, besides a few, that it was going to be so crushing at the time to
Very
the real
dramatic.
estate industry. What was your what were those days like? Where now all of a sudden you went kind of from feast to famine, right?
Well, I have a very clear recollection that in December that I had just an amazing month. There was like 30 closings, just boom, boom,
December
boom,
of
boom,
05
boom.
was that?
I believe it was like December
Yeah,
of 05,
yeah.
right? And you're just nailing out closings, and you're living that great life, and you're
Yep.
paying off your student loans,
Yep.
and all of the rest of the fun stuff that comes
Dreaming
with,
about what's going to be. I'm going to be an investor. I'm going to this. I'm going to that.
I'll be at this age. I'll retire by 40.
Yeah.
All of that kind
Yeah.
of conversation. And then in early January, I remember very, very clearly being at a closing table, and having explained the documents. And in those days, everybody went to the closing still. And then you could hear the closer. She's in the background on the phone, and she's like, "What do you mean?
What
What
do
are you
mean?
talking about? You can't do that.
Yeah.
Can I talk to a supervisor?
He got fired yesterday.
What? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Hello? And then she puts down the phone. She goes, "That was the bank. they've ceased operations. They're not going to fund the loan. They've gone out of business. And so everybody's just sitting there like, this is unheard of. This is what? How is that even possible?
Yeah, and if you closed with it, I was in the mortgage business. If you closed at 5 o'clock the day before, your loan got funded.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so it was really one day to the next.
Right. You come in at 9 o'clock in the morning and, you're waiting for a funding authorization. And, her concern was that she had instructions that had been delivered the night before and was trying to call the person who she was directed to call. Nobody was answering, so she tried to find a back way in. And next thing you know, the bank is closed permanently. So that was interesting.
Yeah, and then the slide happened.
And then a series of cancellations of contracts came in after that because the lenders were going out of business. And then, people were freaking out about, everything else. And, so it's like from one minute you're doing great to the next minute, you see the tumbleweeds coming into the office versus real estate contracts.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was marked with at that time for me was, you had this thought that it's going to turn around soon. Like there's this kind of naive optimism and this and that.
Normalcy bias.
Yeah, normalcy bias. It's got to come back. This can't happen. All this, but guess what? It did. It was for much longer than most people realized, and it was a much deeper cut than most people realize.
Absolutely.
So how'd you survive that time, Felix, both, just strategically and just emotionally, psychologically?
Well, I would say that there's two parts of it. There's the biblical adage of 7 years of feasting and then 7 years of famine.
Yep.
Right, and so I was kind of brought up in that way. My grandmother,
Storing your nuts.
Right, my grandmother was a product of the Great Depression. Don't waste anything. Don't be frivolous.
Yes.
And as a young lawyer, I was a little frivolous. I bought the fancy car. I bought the
Yep.
fancy suits. I bought the fancy place. I actually used to live right down the block over here in the high rise. So I was enjoying the fruits of my labors and successes. But I did also have savings because I was always cheap, I guess, prudent as well with finance. But, when you go a month or two and then 3 months into having very few transactions coming through the door and you're struggling to fund the ones that have already come through, you realize in very, very short order that maybe real estate is not where your next meal is going to come from. But
And you had people on payroll at the time.
I had people on
now you have
payroll.
to make tough decisions, right?
And I have wife and kids,
Yeah.
and I have mortgage and all that rest of that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are things you have to think about in letting people go because you don't have work anymore, and that's all the emotional stresses. Yet at the same token, trying to win business out there and be Mr. Positive and hey, I got you and I'm here for you. And
well, but the fun part is that then you call the realtors that were generally the ones who would refer you transactions, and then you find out that they've already left the business because they realized that they weren't getting any new prospects. Nobody was listing their house and nobody was purchasing, and there was no finance authority where you could go to. I mean, the banks were really, really tight on credit.
Yep.
So then, everybody went back to, I guess, a real job, like we used to say.
Yep.
And so then those referral sources disappear. So frankly,
you had a pivot.
Yeah, you have to do a pivot and a cartwheel and a jumping jack on top of it. And so what you end up doing is, since that time, I've maintained this, where about 60% of the business is the transactional real estate, but then the other 40 is still going back to litigation. And so, but now with my practice, what I do is I do a lot of real estate litigation. And then in those days, I would do foreclosure defense. I would do the modifications for the short sales. And that now that's sort of in the dustbin, maybe to come back, who knows? But I've always done now building court matters and other real estate related litigation.
And so, Felix, I see this, kind of tapestry of experience that is now really able to benefit people that are working with you. From the litigation side of it, from working plaintiff, from working on the defense side, from pivoting and being an entrepreneur that says, hey, I have to make some decisions here. All of these things now manifest itself in great transactions for you and your clients.
Well, you have to know where the market's going in order to eat, and then to have a breadth of opportunity that you can bring to each of the transactions always benefits the client, because then you could give the client some knowledge perhaps maybe other transactional attorneys don't know or deal with. As an example, just a super simple one, boyfriend and girlfriend decide to go and buy a house together. Well, you're boyfriend and girlfriend. All right, let's create an agreement that says exactly how we're going to wind this down in case boo and bae don't end up working out. And so sometimes people are very open to that conversation, and then other times they're not so open to that conversation. But inevitably, I would say about 70% of the time, I get a call a few years down the road that says, hey, this didn't work out. We should have followed your advice on the agreement, but now we're fighting, and now we have to deal with this situation.
And it's much harder, right, to work on it from that angle when you have hostile parties as opposed to everyone going into it.
That's exactly the case. And then, then you get the judge to decide versus having, autonomy to make the decision based upon your preconceived plan and implementation versus having to litigate and fight. And then, could you believe you did this? And, so it gets really dramatic.
So, Felix, in your mind or through the agent's experience, what is the Felix Gonzalez or Archer Law brand? What does that bring? What does an agent get? How are you able to separate yourself? I mean, we see it in your story, but how does that manifest tangibly in a transaction today?
So, clients call the office. We want to make sure that they feel comfortable. We want to make sure that they understand that you're bringing 23 years of experience to the table, and that, every day when you think you've seen it all, sometimes you get surprised. But for the most part, real estate is pretty consistent and it's stable in terms of, number one, the personalities that you deal with. So I'm fortunate that I get to deal with a lot of the same colleagues as attorneys and a lot of the same brokers and agents.
You walked in today and you were like, hey, morning, Joe.
I recognized, one of my colleagues over here, great guy.
Yep.
But, also, so a lot of it is maintaining relationships.
Yep.
That's really what it comes down to.
And that was from the beginning of your first days in court to today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of my, we don't get joy sometimes in the practice of law because it's a thankless profession. Because, people pay a fee and they're like, well, you did what I paid you to do. So, bye.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things I really like is that there's some families that I helped, grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and now their kids are buying, and they've all come to me. So it's really a lot of fun to become the family lawyer, to become the lawyer that they say, hey, I got a legal question. I'm going to send Felix a message. And, send a quick response back, and they say thank you. A few weeks later, they'll come in for some other legal advice. They need a referral for a service that I don't provide, then I'm able to send it to a colleague that I trust that's going to take care of them like I would. So that's really, I think, one of the best parts. And, we have a system, we have a process, and we check in on our folks to make sure that they're protected. That's really what they get.
Felix, I think about just how you said that you respecting everyone in the courtroom, going back to Jim Bartlett, mentor. And, a lot of people, they think that the success principles are going to start kicking in once they're successful. Then I'll start respecting people. But for right now, it's dog eat dog or whatever it is. And what you realize is, no, those foundational principles help you raise up. And those are the things that still separate you today. But you got to implement them way before success is kind of on the horizon, type of thing.
Well, I think it's really a question of authenticity as well, right?
Yeah.
So what you do in one circumstance is typically how you act and behave and manifest in others.
Yes.
And so I've always been an agreeable fellow to the point that I needed to be agreeable, and then aggressive where I needed to be aggressive.
Yeah.
And, you could be, I think General Mathis once said, be kind, courteous, and professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet. And I always thought that was like, okay, that's exactly, I think, the point, and obviously that was in a different context other than the courtroom, but, maybe in the metaphysical sense that you say, if we can't work this out, we can't agree, I'm going to use the full weight of my legal knowledge to represent my client and get my objective. So that's always the position I've taken.
That's the other side of it that you have to be ready to go to if you need to.
Right. And, reputation in this business or any other business is a very fickle thing. And reputation is a funny thing because it's the one thing that we create for ourselves, and it's also the one thing we could destroy for ourselves. And it's always how you treat other people that determines that.
Great. So what's the future, Felix, for your firm? Is it just continue to do excellent work in the spaces that you're in, or is there another vista that you're looking at?
Well, it's interesting. It's a fortuity of timing. In the next few months, I'm going to actually do a rebrand of the office. As I'm turning 50 next year, and so I'm looking, about a 10-year horizon to start walking my way out the door of the practice, to start training the next generation of young lawyers who's going to come through. And eventually, now that lawyers can sell our practices, I'm looking to grow my office in a way where, I can have associates and bigger staff and, all of the rest of that to come along with. So we're going to be doing a rebrand that's very consistent with what we've already got, but we're going to have expanded product offerings. We're going to have relations with other attorneys who do stuff that we don't do. And I'm going to continue to grow the practice and really turn it into marketing arm where people understand that there's a system and a process for making sure that their family objectives are resolved, but then also to make sure that we have a good client experience and that we continue to grow in a market which, who knows what's going to happen with the economy, but I know for me and my staff and my family, we want to continue to grow, and that means seeking out new opportunities.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so you're thinking of the future, you're planning, you're plotting.
I'm planning 10 years out,
Yeah.
right? And so, I've had a lot of time in the last year or so to sit down and to envision what this would look like. And so I've met with my, consultants and stuff to do that. So we'll be doing some interesting rebrandings, and that's going to be the new baby for this year.
So Felix, and I think you're going to do great, just as you always have done. So you're a guy that is more than business. You're active in your community. So what's important to you? I know you're a big Second Amendment person,
Very
right?
much so.
Yeah, and as am I, and I think. So how are you active in that community? And you have the Guns and Tacos.
Right.
So what's the heart behind it?
So, going back to the financial crisis that we discussed, was never into guns growing up. My dad had, the typical revolver that was in the sock drawer in the dresser. Never had gun culture in my house or anything of that nature. But it was very interesting during the crash. I mean, I knew a few people who didn't do well emotionally during that time. I saw a lot of people in a great deal of panic. And it just occurred to me that this might be something that I might want to learn about. And then I acquired my first firearm, and then another, and then it became a interesting passion. So I don't just have all kinds of stuff. I have a lot of historical guns as well. And so one of the nerd things that I like to do with the firearms that I have is there's forums where you can actually find, where they were manufactured, then what units they were deployed with. Then you could find out what battles those units fought in. And then so you nerd out with the history on the firearms. But
so where these guns actually were, where they were fired, what they were used for, maybe even by who.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a little nerd rabbit hole that I've enjoyed going down with those. Great. And then, frankly speaking, I'm not athletic in any real sense. So, but I'm competitive. And so with firearms, it's interesting because it's always you versus you. So if you don't practice, it shows up on the target, right? It shows up on the paper when your group is like this versus it's a smaller grouping. And so it's a constant thing. You're always honing, you're always practicing. And so then what ended up happening is I said, well, if I'm going to enjoy this, I want to learn as much as I can. I started taking instructor certifications. And so now I've got like over 9 different instructor certifications. And I actually teach Arizona, Utah, the Indiana license to carry, as well as the Illinois conceal and carry classes. And right now I'm actually teaching twice a month the Utah and Arizona classes. So
is that online?
No, it's actually in person. I teach in Hammond, Indiana at the Cabela store.
Wow.
So I work with a company that they have a nationwide contract with Cabela's and Bass Pro. And I've taught all over the place. During the pandemic, they had me going out to Connecticut. And, for me, it's really, obviously, it's a self-protection issue.
Sure.
I enjoy the fact that I can protect my family.
Yep.
But as a citizen, it's very important to me that we are able to exercise our rights. So I'm just as
passionate. Whether it be property and all these things that you talked about before.
I'm as passionate about the Second Amendment as I am the First Amendment to go to church and to say what I like and to do what I want and to hang out with whoever I want. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the second one is right after the first one, which is freedom to assemble. So there's that. But for me, it's just something that I enjoy to do. And you mentioned my event, Guns and Tacos, Facebook page. And every year we've hosted that event, and we go out to the Buffalo Range out in Ottawa. And in the last few years, we've been able to donate money to different charities, including for veterans and for police officers.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about is we're talking about a thoughtful guy who's involved in the law, who's never, been, on the bad side of the law, and who's yet still a proponent of this. And so I imagine that you've had a lot of interesting conversations, having to, listen to people and hear their points of view of maybe they're reasonable or whatever it is, the other side of the story. How have those conversations gone for you, Felix? And you're now at this point, you're an advocate that says, hey, I want to speak up for this, because it's not just a bunch of people living in a shack in the woods, waiting for the apocalypse with a bunch of firearms.
It's interesting because I think that there's a perception of who is a potential gun owner versus what I see as an instructor as I'm teaching my students. So my class is held in Hammond, Indiana. My typical student is a black female. So for me, that is my passion.
Wow.
Because those are women who have children.
Yep.
They live alone. Maybe their community is not as safe as they would like. And they recognize that, they're their own first responder. So that to me is very important, to bring that to them in order to assist them. I had a gentleman the other day, and his permit was expiring literally the next day. And I was able to get him I was able to accommodate him the next day, do a renewal. This is a guy who worked 30 years for the railroad, sweet guy, took care of his grandmother, just like my kind of people, like a pillar of the community. But he realized, unknowingly, that his permit was going to expire. So I was able to make sure that he didn't have to take the 16-hour class all over again. So when I can help people like that, I enjoy it. There's a lot of people who come to me and say, well, I hate guns, or we shouldn't have guns. And, that's their position, frankly. It's not my place to change their mind.
But it doesn't come up during the real estate transaction. I mean, it doesn't come up, generally speaking. You want to talk about it, I'll talk about it. But otherwise...
Right, yeah. I mean, I don't bring it up to folks because, I never know where they're coming from. Yeah. I mean, there's people who've had bad instances and whatever. But honestly, what I tell people, I said, well, you know what? If it's not for you, I respect that. And that's okay. It's for me. It's for me. Yeah. And I'm going to exercise my rights. And then, in the last year, the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court really made it clear that some of these 20,000 gun laws that we have regulating firearms and the people who use them, that maybe we need to focus more on enforcement rather than all of the new laws that they're trying to come out with, which at this point are all going to be unconstitutional.
So, well, that's great, Felix. I'm glad we were able to talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about just, kind of this idea of backing the blue. So interesting, there's this real estate soccer community, okay, that I'm a part of. And we played against the Chicago PD, okay, and they whooped us. Okay, it was 13-9.
We were foot chases.
Yeah, no kidding. And I'm telling you what, they were organized. They looked great. We had a lot of fun doing it. And after the game, they gave us a nice plaque and this kind of thing. And the leader of that team said, hey, we just want to let you know that, we sweat, we have families that are all here, we bleed, and we enjoy soccer, and this is why we're doing it, is to let you know that we're actually human beings. And, that day, maybe a few days before that game, one of the members of the team was shot and killed in the city. This is a young man that they just found the person yesterday, maybe.
Right.
You know what I'm
well,
talking about?
He was up for arraignment. He had been caught right afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Lasso.
Exactly.
Lasso.
Officer Lasso. And so he was on that soccer team and didn't show up that Saturday, that we played. And so these are real guys with real families that, pay the ultimate price. And so talk a little bit about your just your perception of all that.
I think that we've really come to a very interesting point in our society where we have decided to take away our own individual accountability. And we've come to a place in society where we've said, and in one of my many travels, I was actually appointed by Governor Quinn to sit on the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority Board. That's a long title. What did we do? Well, we basically directed state and federal money towards all kinds of programs, including incarceration, reducing recidivism, community investment for teens, so that instead of being on the streets in the summer, they have a place to go. We did all of these different types of things to help to make sure that prison wasn't the first option for a number of wayward youths and, sometimes, middle-aged adults and everybody else in between. What you find is that criminal behavior tends to manifest itself essentially from the age of about 15 to about 28 in the majority of the male population. And if you look at what's going on with those individuals, frequently they're involved in households that are single parent households, typically raised by the mother. Typically the father is absent. They've struggled throughout their academic career with schooling, consistency of being in school, and then they're essentially ending up on the streets, being raised by the streets, and being raised
It's a tough place.
And it's the worst place.
Yeah.
It's the worst place.
You have to defend yourself. You have to be hair trigger, ready to fight at the drop of a hat.
But what ends up happening is you're raised essentially in a trauma culture, because then not only are you being attacked by, let's say, rivals, but you're also on the defense. Then you're seeing good friends, pass away from this lifestyle. So we looked at all of these different things, Steve, and what I understand as a person who never has had to deal with any of that. My parents, we were raised very middle class and everything else, but I can look at my fellow brothers and sisters and say, you know what, don't be mad at the police officer who arrests you as a consequence of your behavior. There's no relationship between poverty and criminality. You could be a poor person, but still maintain respect for yourself, for other people's properties and other people's lives. And, what we really need to do as a society is to focus on how do we strengthen the family? How do we make sure that these young men who are engaged in these high-risk behaviors because they don't have adult role models, typically, I have two boys, and I raised my kids in the Scout program until very recently when they decided not to finish. But, that program is structured, and the men and the fathers were there, and the community was there supporting them. We would go, to have weekly or monthly masses with the community. And the amount of support that we got was great. And that's what I think young men need, because young men are at most at risk for criminal behavior. And, I would encourage all of the men out there, if you're not already involved with some program that deals with mentorship of young people, society needs you. Take your own kids, go to YMCA, go to a Scout meeting, go to Boys and Girls Foundation, whatever your flavor is, make sure that you're giving that, because any man can be a dad, but only a real man can be someone who can act like a father. And I think young men, you can literally make the difference in someone's lives, and then that takes away from that hopelessness. As I understand the facts, that was an 18-year-old man who was dating a 37-year-old woman. Apparently there was some kind of argument that they had about him being able to provide for her. So I think that, first of all, when I look at an 18-year-old dating a 37-year-old, I see an imbalance of relationship there. And then he acted out in a negative way with rage, got a domestic call, and then his answer, instead of saying, okay, I crossed the line, was to have a handgun, which under Illinois law, under federal law, he's not supposed to have until he's 21. And he took the life of this officer.
So more laws to stop him from shooting something. He already broke the law.
Well, murder's illegal.
Right.
Having a handgun at 18 when you're supposed to be 21 is illegal. Fleeing arrest is illegal. Getting involved with the domestic is illegal. So, do we fill up our fingers with more laws that, they're called a criminal for one reason. Is because they engage in crime. And whether or not a piece of paper on the books means anything has to do with how they were raised, and have respect for institutions and have respect for their fellow citizens. So, I read that, Lasso's wife posted essentially a eulogy, and it was beautiful, but it was heartbreaking at the same time. And I think that we need to get back to saying to people, there are norms of behavior in a civilized society. We will help you if you're having a hard time and you're struggling. But if you cross the line, you're going to have to pay the consequences. And they will be swift and they will be onerous. And people have to understand that, if you continue to hurt people, you're just going to need a timeout from society and you're going to be incarcerated until you figure it out.
Yeah, and then the rest of those, I think about the rest of those men that were part of that soccer team, right? They're all thinking now, they have to really keep their wits about them to not lump all of society into what Lasso did, right? Or whatever it is. They have to still get out tomorrow and pull people over and speak to people and all this. And so there's a way of respecting them as people in the community that are supposed to be, people act out and all that, but they're on the good side. They're on the team that's trying to help.
I wouldn't want to live in a town that didn't have a police officer. I wouldn't want to live in a town that didn't have fire department.
Yeah.
I could take care of myself pretty good, but I'm just one person and I can't respond, and that's not my role. So we have folks who are our guardians and our protectors. If you go back, there's all these cultural analogies. Even God had angels to protect. St. Michael the Archangel, one of the patron saints of police officers, defend us in battle against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. So we've always understood that we have military. So we always understand as a society that we have a rank of protectors. But if we vilify them in the way that we have done in the last few years, if we don't allow them to do their necessary function of taking those elements off of the street which are causing harm, we're not helping society, we're hurting society. As a side note, I mentioned that a lot of my students in my Hammond store are African American women. They're the most conservative. They're the most critical of this recent push to defund the police and to have no cash bail and to be sought. And I'm very conservative generally. They're past me because they know that, it's their nephew or their neighbor's kid or whatever, and they know he's gotten out 3 or 4 times, and they know he doesn't care, and he's just going to keep on doing it. He's going to keep on doing it until either the street catches up with him or he gets a life sentence. And so I find that people...
That's real street stuff. That's
real people.
You're getting in the... it's not the narrative, not the news, not this, not that, not some talking head. This is real life stuff.
These are real people who see what's happening to their communities, and they do not like it. And they're arming up because they know that the police have to use the word, they've been handcuffed because if they go and arrest somebody, they spend 3-4 hours doing paperwork, that person posts bond, the next day they're back out on the streets. The one joke about criminal justice is that those police who just randomly pick up a kid or whatever, they've seen them on that street corner dealing whatever. They've seen them. These police run a beat.
Right.
They're familiar with these people.
They know the players.
They know the players in the game, and so instead of playing cat and mouse, what we really need to do is just to get back to common sense and making sure that people understand that if you, Beretta used to say, don't do the crime if you can't do the time.
Yes. And Felix, when you were leading these scout troops, I'm sure you've seen the men or the young boys that were becoming men, and that's an investment, right? So people say, what can I do, right? Those are some of the things that we can do is to participate in those things, whether it be coaching the baseball team or whatever, a chance where you're impacting people where they can look at it and go, oh, look at this guy, that's different, that's a different life. Kids need to see that. They need to have those role models.
Right.
So bravo to you.
And I've seen, but it's not just me. I've seen lots of men.
Yeah.
Right. You go and you sit there, and then unfortunately, there's a lot of fathers who don't take parenting seriously, and that's unfortunate. That should change. But if they do, they will. If they don't, they won't. And somebody else can step in because, especially young men, in my view, they need somebody to sit there and say, life is going to be a challenge, but be tougher than the challenge. You're going to have a lot of temptation, but don't be tempted. Do what's right, not what's expedient, and have a future vision of what you want to become. And if young men could continue to hear that message from someone who's doing it and who's encouraging them to do it, this criminal justice situation will really fall by the wayside. You know, but we have to become involved, and we have to invest in our neighbors and our kids.
Great messages, Felix. Well, Felix, thank you so much. So the Facebook page is
Guns and Tacos.
Guns
It's
and
got
Tacos.
it's got an icon of a taco with a sombrero and 2 pistolas.
Okay, and so in the rebranding of your firm, is it still going to be called Archer Law?
Nope.
Okay. Do you want to unveil it, or is that
Name to come.
Okay, name to come. Okay, great. That's exciting.
I
and
already
we'll
have it,
post
but
that.
name to come.
Okay,
it'll be very
fantastic.
familiar, Steve.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. I'm intrigued.
Yep.
Well, Felix, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Just
Pleasure having you on.
Yeah, it's
Have me on.
it's great to see the work you're doing in the community. It's inspiring to hear your career journey, and it's great to understand what they get when they have Felix Gonzalez on the case or in the transaction. So thanks.
Zealous advocate for all my clients. Thank you, Steve.